Guess what? I was shocked when John suddenly said he wanted a divorce while we were getting ready for a funeral. He said he wanted to marry someone who didn't want kids, so he didn't want to keep paying for our child, Charlie. I felt relieved that I wouldn't have to deal with child rearing expenses anymore, but also upset that this man was Charlie's father. We agreed to the divorce, and John left on the day of the funeral. Later, I found out that John was scared when he saw Charlie's will because it was time for me to stand up for myself. Let me tell you a bit about me. I'm Natasha, a 42-year-old housewife. I used to work in a company as a translator, but now I work freelance. My husband John is 45, 3 years older than me. We got married when I was 29, and we had our son Charlie the following year. Unfortunately, John wasn't very involved in raising Charlie, who was often sick. When Charlie got really sick at 12, I tried calling John, but he didn't pick up. Maybe he was at a business meeting. So, instead of calling John, I decided to message him. His response came the next morning, and I immediately called him. This time, he picked up right away, but he seemed annoyed. I urged him to come to the hospital because Charlie was really sick, but John brushed it off, saying his presence wouldn't make a difference and worried about the hospital bills. He hung up abruptly, leaving me feeling angry and frustrated. As time passed, Charlie's condition didn't improve despite the change in seasons. Doctors even doubted he'd make it through winter. I reduced my work hours to spend more time with him. Charlie noticed my absence from work and expressed concern, but I assured him everything was fine. To ease his worries, I started working from the hospital room, right beside him. Charlie loved reading and studying, so I tried to make his environment as comfortable as possible. However, John never visited Charlie, nor did he show any concern. He only complained about the expenses and criticized my decisions, leaving Charlie feeling alone and neglected. I realized that pushing John to visit Charlie wouldn't make a difference, so I didn't insist. By then, John often came home late, smelling of alcohol. He said it was because of work, but evidence suggested he was having an affair. Despite his neglect, I hesitated to divorce him because I worried it would upset Charlie. Meanwhile, Charlie's health kept deteriorating. When his doctor told me he only had about a month left to live, I was devastated. Despite continuing treatment for another 2 weeks, Charlie's condition worsened. When the doctor said there was no more treatment to try, I decided to take Charlie home for his final days. Charlie was happy about going home, but John seemed indifferent. It was clear to me that John was beyond redemption, and I had lost all hope in him. Charlie was scheduled to be discharged the next evening. As I busied myself with packing Charlie's things and getting ready to bring him home, he suddenly asked me, "Mom, do you love Dad?" His question caught me off guard. But before I could respond, he continued, "Dad doesn't seem interested in me or you. So if you don't love Dad, I want you to divorce and live your life." I could tell Charlie had picked up on the tension between John and me. But as a parent, I couldn't let him worry about our problems. So I quickly reassured him with a smile, telling him that I loved his dad and that he cared about us too, even though he was busy. Charlie didn't seem entirely convinced, but he dropped the subject and fell asleep. 2 days later, he passed away at home. John never showed up, but I stayed by Charlie's side, holding his hand and grieving. After Charlie's passing, the doctor and nurse, who had been with us since Charlie was young, came to mourn with us. They handed me a letter from Charlie's bag, saying he wanted me to have it if anything happened. In the letter, Charlie expressed his gratitude to the doctor and nurse for their care. I found myself alone, without John's help, while Charlie was suffering from his illness. I felt grateful to those who supported us during this tough time. After they left, I opened the letter Charlie had left beside him. Its contents surprised me and made me cry. Alongside Charlie's gratitude, the letter contained something shocking that angered me deeply. Despite my turmoil, I had to focus on planning Charlie's funeral. I decided on a small, homey service, but John, who had been absent for so long, finally showed up the day before the funeral, reeking of alcohol. His nonchalant attitude and comments about how I aged only added to my frustration. He seemed disconnected from the reality of Charlie's passing, treating it like a distant event. Arguing with John felt pointless, so I chose to focus on the funeral arrangements. Despite the pain of losing Charlie, there was a strange sense of relief knowing I wouldn't have to worry about child-rearing expenses anymore. However, John's sudden mention of divorce during the funeral preparations left me utterly shocked, highlighting his selfishness once again. But this was too much to bear. John's words hit me like a ton of bricks. There's a woman I want to marry, but she doesn't want kids. So with Charlie alive, the child support and medical expenses would drain my money. His callousness cut deep, and a wave of relief swept over him at the thought of being free from financial burdens. The realization that such a man was Charlie's father sent a chill down my spine. As my head cleared, anger boiled inside me. I agreed to the divorce immediately. Fine, I said. Then I'll take the house. Get out as soon as you can. Just wait until after the funeral. With that, John left on the day of the funeral. At the funeral, as I read Charlie's will, John's face turned pale. Relatives glared at him with fierce faces. It was my turn to strike back. Charlie's will expose John's affair. Until I read the will at the funeral, John had been pretending to be a grieving father, crying loudly. How could such a letter exist? It's not true, right, Nedisha? John tried to deny it, appearing pathetic. I silently took out an envelope from my bag and thrust photos in front of him. He stumbled over his words, his face still pale. I smiled sweetly and asked the relatives to pass around a few photos I had. Whispers of disgust and small cries of shock arose from all around. Despicable. Not visiting his frail son, but with this woman in such a scandalous manner. The glares at John intensified, and he slumped down in his seat. I then presented John with the divorce papers. He looked up at me in shock, his voice cracking as if he was about to cry. You didn't pay attention to me because you were always nursing him. It was just a fling. Forgive me. I don't want a divorce, John pleaded. Not paying attention. You're not a child. I repeatedly asked you to help me nurse him, but you always ran away, claiming work as an excuse. As soon as John said that nursing was dirty, he disappeared from my view. When I looked down, he was crawling on the floor, with my father-in-law standing over him, breathing heavily. You, what do you mean nursing your own son is dirty? Enough with the jokes. A parent who doesn't care for their child isn't a parent at all. You're the lowest of the low. My in-laws had always adored Charlie. They celebrated every time he was discharged from the hospital, bought him his favorite things, and never missed a visit. They had been covering for John, believing his excuses about being busy at work, never imagining their own son could be such a disgrace. Tears streaked their faces as they glared at John, who sat in disbelief, clutching his cheek where he'd been struck. Nedisha, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. If we knew he was such a man, we would have encouraged you to divorce him sooner. We are truly sorry. My in-laws began to bow deeply, but I hurried to lift them up. It wasn't their fault. Charlie loved his grandparents, and their presence was one reason I hadn't divorced John. You guys are not to blame. Look, Charlie's letter says thank you and stay healthy. Charlie and I both love you very much. I reassured them. My mother-in-law hugged me, sobbing quietly, and my father-in-law was also crying, apologizing to me. John finally came to his senses, stood up, and pointed at me, yelling, "Don't be ridiculous. She's just an old lady who couldn't even take care of her husband, a failure of a wife." As my father-in-law lunged towards John, I stepped in front of him. John looked at me with a fearful yet defiant glare. What, you got something to say? Not really. This is reality. No one here is on your side. And make sure to pay back the money you've borrowed from many people, haven't you? I said. After reading Charlie's letter, I had contacted the relatives John had borrowed money from. They began murmuring, realizing John's expensive activities involving a woman from a nightclub, realizing that John couldn't afford his lavish lifestyle on his salary alone. I checked if anyone had lent him money. To my surprise, it wasn't just John's relatives but mine as well. Under the pretense of Charlie's medical expenses, John had borrowed money, but it was clear he had used it for his affair. I lent that money thinking it was for Charlie. Give me back my $20,000 right now. One relative demanded. Same here. I want my $40,000 back, another exclaimed. This sparked a cascade of demands from various relatives for the money John had borrowed. John's face turned paler with each claim, and he turned to me, weakly smiling. Natasha, we're a couple, right? You'll help me, won't you? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? You didn't help with nursing, didn't contribute to the medical expenses, or even the living expenses. Instead, you borrowed from everyone for your own selfish needs. Unbelievable. Why would I help you? With a pathetic voice, John slumped back down, seemingly out of energy to retort. I looked down at him, ready to deliver the final blow, and called to the entrance, Cheryl, please come in. John's face turned into sheer panic as he stared at the entrance. Cheryl, the woman from the photos, walked towards me hesitantly. She looked plain, with light makeup, a stark contrast to the woman in the photos. I invited her on Charlie's last day. She was with you, right? I thought it would be a nice gesture if Cheryl could attend the funeral. But when she arrived, I didn't mince words. I'm sorry about this. Save it. No need for such superficial words, I told her firmly. Cheryl's face turned as pale as John's as I handed her some documents. I called you here today to sign these. Please read them carefully and sign. $100,000? I can't pay that. It's impossible, Cheryl exclaimed. It's not for you to decide whether you can pay or not. I replied sternly, refusing to let her off easily. John, trembling, stood between Cheryl and me, pleading for forgiveness on her behalf. It's my fault, so please forgive Cheryl. Demanding $100,000 from her is just too cruel, he said. Why should I? I'm merely asking for compensation for the affair, I retorted, waiting for John's next words. That's because Cheryl is fragile, unlike you. How do you expect her to earn $100,000? How cruel can you be, John? John raised his eyebrows and sighed heavily. Cheryl clung to John's back, and they seemed lost in each other. The cold stares weren't only from me. The relatives were ready to give them a piece of their mind. But I decided to add fuel to the fire. Cheryl, your son is hospitalized, right? Son? Cheryl flinched at my words. He's 12, just like Charlie was always in the hospital. Your ex-husband took custody, right? Tough with all the hospital and treatment costs, not to mention the bed fees. You must be getting quite a demand for child support, aren't you? How? How do you know that? Cheryl looked at me as if she'd seen a ghost. John was frozen in shock. I pulled out some documents from my bag and handed them to John. He shakily read them, then suddenly pushed Cheryl away. Hey, what's this? Divorced with a kid? You never told me. Didn't you say the money was for your family living far away? John accused. I didn't lie. My son is my family. So I've been with a used woman. Where's the true love you promised? Cheryl responded, her voice breaking. After Cheryl threw her shoe at John and he lunged at her, they started brawling like children. Fortunately, a security guard intervened. I approached the disheveled pair with a smile. John, please sign the divorce papers and arrange for the alimony. Cheryl, I won't reduce your compensation by a single cent. And your ex-husband said something about your affairs being a sickness that can't be cured. Seems like you have a few partners, so with that kind of leeway, expect enforced payments for the child support, treatment costs, and alimony. That's impossible. John hung his head, speechless, and Cheryl was led away by security, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I apologized to each relative for the disturbance, and they comforted me, bringing me to tears. After that, my divorce from John was finalized, and we also agreed on the amount of alimony he had to pay, just as I had requested. This incident infuriated his parents tremendously. Moreover, the extended family was outraged to discover they had been deceived too, giving him the cold shoulder. Of course, he was asked to return the money he embezzled, and it seems like he borrowed it from some shady sources. To repay the debt, he's been working multiple jobs, but the repayment is so huge that he's rumored to have nothing left for living expenses. Eventually, unable to keep up with the ballooning interest, last month he was taken away by some intimidating guys. His parents don't even intend to file a missing person report. So while I hope he's safe, I can't help but wish he suffers unimaginable pain. As for Cheryl, all the men she dated found out about her affairs and the child she had, cutting off all financial support. At 30, she's considered old for her line of work, struggling to attract clients, and eventually had to turn to her parents. She paid the alimony in one lump sum. However, she's since been sent to work on a farm on some island with her wages going directly to her parents for debt repayment. As for me, I moved with Charlie's memorial tablet. I bought a house near the ocean, something Charlie always wanted, and now live there alone with the cat he wished for. I look forward to the times when my in-laws visit, and we reminisce about Charlie. Another letter from Charlie arrived for me. In it, he wrote in slightly blurred script about his gratitude, apologies for leaving for heaven first, and his wish to be my child again in another life. The letter ended with, "Mom, stay true to yourself, stay healthy, and live a long life," inspiring me to live my life for Charlie. Despite the sadness of not seeing my beloved child grow up, I'm living each day to the fullest.